Talks are gathering momentum to bring an end to the war in Gaza. Day 3 of the indirect negotiations in Egypt coincide with the 2-year anniversary of the start of Israel's war with Hamas. U.S. President Donald Trump says that America will do everything possible to make sure that everyone adheres to the deal if Hamas and Israel do agree on a ceasefire, adding that he saw a real chance of a breakthrough. His special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are expected to attend the meeting. The Qatari Prime Minister and Turkey's intelligence chief are also taking part in the talks, based on Trump's 20-point proposal. And as peace talks continue, so too does Israel's bombing campaign in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli offensive has damaged nearly 80% of buildings since it started 2 years ago. Analysis by the UN shows the speed of the destruction month by month. As early as January 2024, over 100,000 buildings had been damaged, mostly in the north around Gaza City. The destruction increased when Israel stepped up its offensive in central and southern Gaza. Entire neighborhoods in the southern city of Khan Yunis were nearly razed to the ground. Nearly 80% of Gaza's roads are also damaged. And let's get more on this. We are joined by DW correspondent Emily Gordine, who's joining us from Jerusalem. Emily, thank you so much for your time this morning. It is 2 years since the October 7th attacks and the war in Gaza then began. How are Gazans coping today?
Well, the short answer is they're barely coping. Life in Gaza has essentially been upended and devastated by this war that's now entering its 3rd year. And the data suggests that if you look at these airstrikes, these Israeli airstrikes, then the majority of those people who have been killed in them have been civilians, many of them children. The total death toll in Gaza now stands at around 67,000 people. Entire families have been wiped out in a single strike. 92% of all homes have been destroyed, so many people are living in tents today. 95% of people are also displaced. They are far away from where their home used to stand, and even if they would try to go home, it would be very difficult for them to even figure out where their home once stood. Barely any schools, universities, hospitals remain intact. And in August, new UN figures showed that only about 1.5% of cropland in Gaza can still be farmed. That means that Gaza in the future will heavily depend on aid. Now, Israel's decision to restrict aid over the course of this war has also meant that, according to the UN, famine has set in the territory. All of this has led to accusations of genocide in Gaza, this by various human rights organizations, including Israeli human rights organizations, but this is also a finding by an independent UN commission. Now, these accusations have been strongly rejected by Israel. At the same time, the Israeli government has refused to let international journalists into Gaza, into the territory. And from the only glimpse that we can essentially capture from Gaza ourselves is by joining airdrops that have occurred over the course of this 2-year war. And what international journalists have seen is that Gaza in and of itself has essentially been razed to the ground.
And Emily, both sides are now at the table. Israel and Hamas are in talks in Egypt, which are set to continue. What do we know about the status of those negotiations?
Well, President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner have arrived in Egypt today to join the negotiations. Trump's team is said to be pushing both sides quite hard to reach a deal, to come to an agreement here. Indirect talks between the two sides started on Monday. They are said to have made some progress. But we understand that now that Witkoff and Jared Kushner have arrived, this could mean crunch time now for these negotiations. With Donald Trump also having said that he will try to make everything possible that both sides will adhere to this deal. Now, crucial sticking points remain over the scope of Israeli military withdrawal from Gaza, American guarantees to make sure that Israel doesn't go back to war once the Israeli hostages have been released, which is something that has played out in March. And of course, there's also a big question mark looming over Hamas disarmament, which so far the group has refused to do.
DW correspondent Emily Gordine in Jerusalem. Thank you.
Hamas and Israel have held a second day of indirect talks at the Egyptian Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. A Hamas spokesman said the group's delegation is seeking to overcome any obstacles and achieve a settlement. He said Hamas was serious in reaching a ceasefire deal based on Donald Trump's plan, but the group insists on Israel's full withdrawal from the territory. All right, well, Giorgio Cafiero is the CEO and founder of Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., and he joins us now. Great to have you on the show. So, Hamas has reiterated its demand for a permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal, but stayed silent on the issue of disarmament. What does that tell us about Hamas's negotiating strategy, do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the network. Always great to be your guest. So Hamas is in principle willing to disarm, and this has been the organization's stance for quite some time. But what Hamas wants is a guarantee that Israel is not going to restart the war, also a guarantee that Israeli forces on the ground will fully withdraw from Gaza. Without these guarantees, I think the Hamas leadership and probably many Palestinians in Gaza are worried that disarmament would be essentially a suicidal move. So those who are trying to advance Trump's 20-point plan will need to find a way to get the Israeli side and the Hamas side to bridge this gap. This issue of Hamas disarming is clearly one of the main sticking points. Perhaps it is the main sticking point. So there are certain guarantees that Hamas is going to want, and that is going to be a challenge for Witkoff, the Qataris, the Turks, the Egyptians, and the others who are trying to get this agreement across the line right now.
Let's talk about the US presence there. You've mentioned some of those who are present in these talks or taking part. How does the US presence in the talks change the dynamics at the table?
Well, obviously, this is Trump's plan. So this is definitely, a US-backed plan. And the US is the one power in the world that really has a leverage over Israel that's necessary to pressure Netanyahu's government into agreeing to some sort of a plan. So it goes without saying the US presence is obviously extremely important. And I think with more of these high-ranking U.S. officials showing up for the talks, that does put pressure on the sides to sort of accelerate the process in terms of moving toward an agreement here.
You've mentioned pressure there on Netanyahu's government. But how much political pressure is Netanyahu and his administration really under to cut a deal? Apart from the United States, of course, is there pressure coming as well, do you think, from within Israel too?
Well, yes, definitely there are, as we have seen and as DW has been spending months covering, there have been many protests in Israel with Israeli citizens demanding an end to the war so that the Israelis who have been held captive in Gaza can return home. Nonetheless, those Israelis are not Netanyahu's constituents, and I don't think that they have really done much to put much significant pressure on Netanyahu to change his calculations. I do think the real pressure that matters here is coming from Trump, because Netanyahu needs the support of the United States. And also, Israel's top trade partners are in Europe, and we have seen across Europe changing attitudes on the part of the general public in many European countries. And we've also seen members of the European Union and also the United Kingdom making these gestures toward Palestinian statehood. This is also a form of pressure on Israel that matters too. So I really think more than the domestic pressure in Israel, it's really the pressure coming from the West that Netanyahu can't ignore. At the same time, though, he's under pressure from the other side. The right-wing extremists in his cabinet do not favor the negotiations with Hamas, and they do not want the conflict to end. But at the end of the day, Netanyahu understands that Israel needs the support of the United States and, to a lesser extent, Europe. And I think that's what is the key point here.
Right. Giorgio, we don't have a huge amount of time, but I do want to put this question to you. The fact is we're 2 years into this war. Gaza is devastated. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. Do you feel like these talks are a turning point? How optimistic are you?
Well, I think if we're being realistic about what can come out of this 20-point peace plan that Trump is pushing, what we could see are the Israelis held captive in Gaza returned home, and also the freeing of many Palestinians who have been held behind bars in Israel, both before and after October 7th, 2023. And I think, clearly we can see a lot of humanitarian assistance coming into Gaza. Really difficult to exaggerate how badly needed that is in Gaza, and presumably an end, or at least a pause of the war. But in terms of addressing the underlying issues of this conflict, I do not see this peace plan addressing those questions about post-governance in Gaza, Palestinian statehood. Those issues I don't think are being addressed right now.
Giorgio, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I've got plenty more questions I could put to you, but great to have your analysis on the show, as always. Giorgio Cafiero, CEO and founder of Gulf State Analytics. Thank you.
Good to be with you.